Andrea, I would like to welcome you to Natural Resources. We usually get around 13 to 15 people to come in on a Zoom committee meeting. And this being Good Friday and also spring break for a number of places and people, I'm not sure quite how the numbers will fall out for us, but we are recording. I hope all of you realize that. And it will make it available to everybody in our group, because Linda with her magic wand puts it into a YouTube presentation on the league website so that we get to share the information that we receive today. And when I sent an email to the Department of Ecology, I said, we've talked a lot about trees, but underlying our quest for trees is the whole idea of protecting our waterways and our quality and quantity of water with the tree. With that said, we also know that a lot of states, California in particular, but also Washington, we are very dependent on snowpack for water that goes to the different people, the population of Washington State. But it's not just the population, of course, humans' needs that are dependent on the quality and quantity of our water. And so Andrea is going to be addressing the overall picture of something that we call water rights in this state. And it kind of muddies that whole picture around need and priorities and what would be some of the other things that come into mind, but population increase, all of those factors that end up in conflict over the amount of water and the amount of really good water that's available. All right, Andrea, maybe you'd like to give a little bit more of your background. I didn't know a lot about you, so I kind of tried to emphasize essentially what it is that you're going to be speaking about. But if you'd like to give a little bit of biography, we'd love to know a little bit more about you.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And thank you for introducing that. That's also helpful context for me to understand what your interests are. So my name is Andrea Louden. I have been working for the Department of Ecology for 4 years now in the Water Resources Program. So the Department of Ecology is the state agency that is the main, environmental regulatory agency at the state level in Washington. And we have different programs. So you mentioned water quality. That's actually a separate program, and they do different types of water quality management and permitting. And I work in the Water Resources Program, and our main work consists of administering and regulating water rights, which I will explain in my presentation. And then we also do a few other things like the regulation of well construction and dam safety and some watershed planning, which I won't be speaking to as much. But is this a good time to start my presentation, do you think?
Yeah, let me Andrea, I need to make you, there we go.
Yes, I see a share screen button, so I should be able to do that.
If we put ourselves too on speaker and
let's see. So can you see my slide now and not my notes? Yes. Okay, great. Okay, great. Well, I will get started then. I think this will take about a half an hour, and then I'd be happy to answer questions. And I'd also love to hear more about where your interests lie and any experiences that you've had related to water rights. I'm always happy to hear that. So my presentation will cover some background, some history on our water rights system, and then I'll cover a range of different types of water uses and kind of go from smaller uses. So permit exempt wells are small uses that don't actually require a water right permit, to the permitting system. And then on a larger scale, what water rights look like for water systems, which are, probably the largest water use in Snohomish County is drinking water for all of the different water systems. And then I'll get into a little bit of the water supply challenges that we see today. So for some background, it's important to know that water cannot be owned by a person. Water rights are not a right to own the water, they're a right to use it. And the waters belong to the people of the state of Washington. So a water right is a right to use a specific amount of water for a specific purpose and in a specific place. And all uses are considered equal. So domestic home uses and irrigation uses are equal in priority. What matters is that the first in time is first and right. I'll keep coming back to that the seniority system is really where the priority system is. So a very simple example of that is if a stream was, if water was being diverted from a small stream to irrigate a farm, and that person had a water right to do so, to use that water from say 1980, and another farmer purchased a property upstream of them on that stream and wanted to start using water to irrigate their farm. And let's say they started using water and there was no water left in the stream for that farmer who had an older water right. That would not be allowed because the first user in time is the first and right. They're allowed to use it first. And that's why we have this permitting system to manage that. Water resources are very limited, particularly over the summer, as we all know. And this is becoming more of an issue as drought is becoming more of an issue with climate change, and we're seeing reduced snowpack, declining fish populations in stream, and continued population growth. So for some history, again, that seniority system is very important, and the most senior users are the tribes. They've been here long before European settlers, and they have the most senior water rights in the state. They are usually not quantified, which is a little bit difficult to manage, but they do have these federally reserved water rights. For example, the Tulalip Indian Reservation has rights from the Treaty of Point Elliott, and those are rights to use water for fishing, hunting, and for the uses of people on the reservation. And the Snoqualmie Indian tribe and Stillaguamish tribe of Indians also have water rights. So once European settlers started arriving in Washington state, they started using the riparian system, which was what's used in the East Coast of the US and in Western Europe. And just means that if there's a stream running by your property, you're allowed to use it. That doesn't work so well in the Western United States. So all Western states started using what's called the prior appropriation system, which is the first in time, first and right system. And that in Washington started in 1917. The Surface Water Code, so Chapter 9003 Revised Code of Washington, established a permitting system for people using surface water, so a stream or a lake, and using water from there. in 1945, that was expanded to groundwater. So people using wells started also needing to use this permitting system then. And that continues to today. But we also set up this system for people who were using water prior to this permitting system. And that's something you may hear about if you are looking into water rights. They're called water right claims. So starting in the 1970s, this form was created where somebody could submit to our department information about their property and say, on my property, someone started using a well starting in 1938, and that's before the groundwater permitting system was created. So I never got a permit for it, but it's this senior right because they started using water before the permitting system. And we have over 100,000 of these claims on file. But what's a little bit difficult to manage about them is that we as a department don't have the authority to say whether or not they are valid. Only a court of law can do that. So we have many claims on file, and you know, we often come across people who are purchasing a property with a claim like this. And what advice we usually give them is that they can get a pretty good idea of whether or not the claim is valid if they can find the historical records that show that water use did start in 1938, that a well was drilled then, and that water has been used on that property since then. So back to this timeline, another change over time is how we have thought about water use in this. So prior to the 1970s, we were really just writing these permits, allocating water, and it was thought kind of by many people that water, if it made it to the ocean and wasn't used by humans, that it was wasted. And that's not how we see it today. So we transitioned into more of an environmental sustainability mentality with the Water Resources Protection Act of 1971 and started protecting water in the stream and saw the value to keeping water in the environment. So what that looks like in the law is these in-stream resources protection programs. This is an example of one in the, so they're in the Washington Administrative Code. This is for the Snohomish watershed. So most watersheds in the state have these programs where there are these protections for in-stream water written into the law, and they essentially act as a water right for the stream. So for the Snohomish River Basin, the Snohomish River is fed by the Snoqualmie River and the and other smaller streams, and there are many in-stream flow protections for those different streams. And this is what one looks like. So so after numerous scientific studies and stakeholder agreement, a in-stream flow was created. This is an example from the Snoqualmie Falls, where an amount of water in stream was determined that would sufficiently protect habitat, water quality, and recreation. And that's the orange line on the graph. So over the course of a year, that's how much water in stream was kind of just a baseline determined to be sufficient. And the green line shows an average of what the actual flow has looked like over time measured at that point on the stream. And the orange line is what's protected in this in-stream resources protection program. So going back to that idea of seniority, any new uses after this was established are junior, and they cannot impact this protected amount of water in the stream. So if you wanted to take a lot of water from the Snoqualmie River, say, you would only be allowed to do so if you were not going to lower the river at this point below that orange line, which is it's kind of a difficult concept to picture, and it is very complicated even for us to manage. So looking at Snohomish County, there are different watersheds within the county, and they each have these in-stream resources protection programs with different protections for streams. They also, have been established at different periods of time. So in 1979, the Snohomish watershed and the Cedar Sammamish watersheds, those green areas on the map, those protection programs were established in 1979, and then the Stillaguamish, the yellow area, in 2005, and the Skagit watershed, upper and lower, in 2001. So kind of just zooming back out, water law consists of statutes, but also common law like the riparian doctrine. And then I'll get into some examples of case law, which also really dictate our regulations and water law in the state. We also have policies and procedures that are internally developed that kind of guide how we actually enforce the law. And those are all published on our website. And we use those to make sure that we're applying the law consistently. And it really all comes back to that first in time, first in right concept that really governs all of water law. So now getting into actual uses of water, starting small, there are small uses of water from a well that don't require getting a water right permit from us. And that's because there are many of these permit exempt wells throughout the state, and we don't need to be regulating every single little use. That's the idea behind this exemption from permitting. But there is a limit to how much water can be used without a permit from us. The limit in statute is that one project is limited to, for domestic uses, 5,000 gallons a day, for commercial uses up to 5,000 gallons a day, and you can irrigate a lawn or garden up to a half an acre. And then also stock watering is allowed without a permit from us. So these are legal rights. People can do this legally, but it still falls within that, within state water law, it's still falls within that seniority system. And just to note, this, it can be misunderstood that this actually applies to projects. So if, say, a subdevelopment were created and all of the new homes were to be served by either one well or all with their own individual wells, as long as it's developed together, that's considered one project and is limited to that 5,000 gallons a day for domestic use and a half acre of lawn and garden. And so that's the basic overarching limitation, but there are also location specific further limitations on how much can be used without a permit from us. And this often varies by watershed. So those in-stream resources protection programs with the in-stream flow rules also can limit how much water can be used without a permit from us even further. So the Skagit and Stillaguamish watersheds have further limitations. And then more recently, there was a case that went to the state Supreme Court where it was found that the county also has a requirement to manage these permit exempt wells. So particularly in areas that don't have further limitations from the in-stream flow rules or from the resource protection programs, the county also was found to need to protect those in-stream resources further under the Growth Management Act. And as a result of this case law, a law was passed to ensure that the county was properly protecting water resources, where that further limited that groundwater permit exemption. So how much could be used in watersheds that didn't already have further limitations. So now, as of 2018, there's this additional limitation. And I'll talk about this a little bit later, but part of this law also developed a program to provide benefits to streams to make up for the impacts from these small permit exempt uses. So all of the small permit exempt wells together can have, a cumulative impact on streams and water resources. So there's a program now that's designed to create projects that improve stream flows. So now getting into the actual permitting system. So a water right is required for all uses of surface water and those larger uses of groundwater above the permit exemption. And this is what the permit actually looks like. So that seniority date is important. And again, the document, the permit actually specifies how much water you can use and for what purpose and when. So this is an example of someone who is using a creek and taking water to serve their home, and they're allowed to use a certain amount just for their home use. And then this is the bottom of that page. It says you can take water specifically from this creek and use it on your parcel. And it's all in that permit document. So you can get a water right permit by submitting an application to us, and then we will investigate it and develop a decision whether we approve it or deny it. It's published online and people can comment on it. And there's also an appeal period, so anybody could appeal the approval. And if it's approved, then a permit is issued. But that's not the final step. There's a development schedule where you begin using water, and let's say you proposed using 100 acre feet. So that's a measurement of water. An acre foot is an acre covered 1 foot high with water. You can picture that like a football field covered in 1 foot of water. Let's say a farmer wanted to use 100 acre feet to irrigate their farm, but then they found that they only actually needed 80. So the permit might be issued for 100, but over time they would see, oh, I'm only using 80 every year. A final document, the certificate, would be issued for 80 acre feet. And then that would be good in perpetuity. It stays with the land. And that's why we have water rights from 1980, 1940. They're good in perpetuity, with some exceptions that I'll talk about. So we will only approve a new water right if it passes a 4-part test. And just some examples. Again, it can't impact that in-stream flow. That would be, the impairment test, that 4th one. It can't impair an existing user, including that in-stream flow. And it also can't be detrimental to the public interest. So one example of that is that we provide water right applications to the Department of Fish and Wildlife, another state agency, and they give us feedback on whether or not they, as fish and wildlife experts, believe that the new project might negatively impact salmon habitat or other wildlife habitat. And we would take that into consideration if we're going to approve a project or not. And then I said that a water right is good in perpetuity, but it can also be changed. So let's say you were a dairy operation and then wanted to switch to switch your operation up and irrigate, your fields instead. You could apply to change these specific elements of the water right. They also can be lost over time. This is one of the more difficult parts of our work, I'd say. So water rights, the idea is it's only good as long as you're using it. If you're not using it, then you can lose it. If you don't use it for 5 consecutive years or more, and or it can be technically abandoned if you also not only stop using it, but also remove your water infrastructure. That would be considered abandonment. And we have a policy on our website about that. That's helpful to understand. I thought it would be helpful to just show you, if you're interested, on our website, we have a mapping application called Water Resources Explorer, where you can look at water rights. And most water rights in the state have been mapped, and what you're seeing on this map, so the top part of the screen is on the right side, an area where there are individual water rights, and those dots are well locations. It looks like those are parcels. There are some really small parcels that are just homes probably, and then larger parcels that are probably fields that are being irrigated. And then on the left side, you're seeing one large shaded in area that's a water system, and that is the water system service area. And so that water right is for a water system and covers the whole service area. And then also some littler water rights behind that. So again, I hope it's helpful to talk about municipal water rights. I live in the city of Seattle, and I'm sure many of you live in urban areas where you're getting your drinking water from a tap. And so it's kind of helpful to, I think, understand where that water is coming from and what it looks like to manage water rights at that kind of larger water system scale. So this is an example of a portfolio of water rights that a city has. They might have a mixture of groundwater rights, surface water rights, and reservoir rights. So on the left here, you can see they have 5 different water rights, and they were issued over a long period of time. The oldest one is from 1930, and they are authorizations to use water from a few different sources. So they have a couple well fields, and they also have a spring source. And then some water systems like the city of Everett and the city of Seattle have really large reservoirs, so they would also have water rights for those. And the city is the one to manage how they use those water rights and make sure that they're staying within their authorizations, the amounts that they're limited to use, and to kind of balance the different sources as needed. And we check in with those water systems to make sure that they're complying with the requirements of their water right, and that our documentation is consistent with their documentation when they submit a update to their water system plan, and that happens every 10 years for larger water systems. And we also, at that point, provide comment on if they have adequate water rights for their projected future demand. So as they grow, this is an example comment here of where the source capacity, there will be a source capacity deficiency by 2030 for the city. And what that means is that their water right limitations don't seem to be enough for what they expect their city to be needing by 2030. But in this case, this city already has a couple active water right applications, so they're seeking new authorizations to use water, and we are already working with them on that. So to get more into water supply challenges and solutions, this won't be comprehensive and cover everything, but here are some things that we are facing currently. So as we know, we are experiencing, reduced snowpack and more drought conditions. This is a map from the USDA. They provide information on, this is snow water equivalent as of March, so about a month ago. And they actually have daily updates. I just wasn't able to pull that this morning. But you can see, so this is Washington State, Seattle, you can see Seattle and Everett, to kind of get an idea of where you are on the kind of left side there. And they're showing within an area what the current conditions look like as to how much snow there is or water in snowpack compared to normal conditions. So from the past 30 years. And we're looking okay. It's not too terrible in the northwest part of the state. We often now are seeing very low snowpack in eastern Washington compared to historical records. So this is definitely a good demonstration of how water is becoming less physically available. So if you currently have an authorization to use water, it might not be as physically available as it was before, and we just might not be able to approve new water rights because it might not, there just is less available. And then we also, when we are looking at water right applications, we have a very strict standard of impairment. So I was talking before about impacting, about how we cannot approve an application if it is going to negatively impact that stream flow that's protected in the In-Stream Resources Protection Program. There have been recent cases that went to the state Supreme Court or the Pollution Controls Hearing Board that really set a standard of impact that's very strict. So any like one drop of water that would lower the stream flow below what's in that rule, what's in that protection program, is not allowed. And so when we're processing water right applications, we often need the groundwater, for example, to be really well, the groundwater flow to be really well understood and modeled in order to know whether or not there would be an impact to the stream from a new use. And this image is just to show, when you're pumping water from a well, that letter Q, it's drawing water away from a stream, and yeah, we have to consider that in the way that we process water right applications. And it can get much more complicated than that. I'm trying to keep it higher level. But there are some solutions that I'll just mention briefly. So folks with existing water rights might be able to come up with ways to manage, their water use and be able to serve more, customers in their water system if they develop their own conservation ordinances or start using reclaimed water or store water during the wet season to be used during the dry season, or develop interties between other systems. And then again, for approving a new water right, it can be often very difficult because of these regulations and the stream flows that we're protecting. But we can approve new rights if they can properly mitigate those impacts to stream flows. And I'll just leave it at that. And then I also just wanted to mention a great grant program that's part of our work is called the Streamflow Restoration Grant Program. This is part of that mitigating for those permit exempt uses that I talked about from 2018. This act was passed that developed this new grant program. They've already had 2 grant programs. The 2022 one is closed, but there will be more in the future. And state and local governments, tribal governments, and nonprofits can apply for grants to fund projects that would get water into streams. So projects like purchasing water rights so that they're not used anymore for consumptive purposes, and improving habitat. And there is most of that funding still available, and this grant program will continue through 2033. So to wrap things up, again, first in time is first in right is what we always go back to. And the water has to be actually used to be to continue to be a good water right in good standing, and it can be relinquished or abandoned. And we have all of these regulations that are kind of like a layer cake: the in-stream flow rules, the statutes, and the case law that limit our ability to approve new water rights and change existing ones. But the goal is always to meet the needs of people, the environment, fish, and balance all of those needs together. And that's all I have, I think. But I would be happy to answer questions. I don't think I can see everyone right now. Let's see if I can fix that. Yeah, do you want to go ahead, Julie?
Yeah, I have a question in terms of the tribal water rights.
Mhm.
So when the tribe was using the land before the European people arrived, they weren't using it for casinos and hotels and gas stations. So does their right include that use, or does it only include the use prior to their developing those sorts of structures?
That's a great question, and I'm afraid I don't have the most helpful answer. Probably the biggest problem in reason why I can't answer that question is because they haven't really been quantified. So the rights for tribes are essentially at the time that like for the Treaty Point Elliott, for the Tulalip tribes, the right was established for the uses at that time, and whether or not those are exactly what the rights are today has never been quantified and not been protected. So, or not been what that looks like today is if a new use were to potentially impair the uses of the Tulalip tribes, then they would have standing to say, we are the senior user, you can't approve this new right.
My question was more of what if the tribe's use of the land impairs the water rights of people living on wells around it? Is it still first in time since they didn't have a casino there when the Point Elliott Treaty was signed?
I don't think I have a good answer to what that would look like. I've never seen a case like that before. But I could follow up with you.
Yeah, that'd be good to know. And then the other question we have is, do all of these laws apply on tribal trust land? So
that's also very difficult to answer, unfortunately.
One of the key things that Andrea said is that the tribal rights have never been quantified.
Yeah.
And as long as they've not been quantified, Julie, it's an uphill battle to try to define it at this point in time. They were never at any point in time quantified. And
so would it have to be quantified in court?
Yeah, and that actually has been done for a couple tribes in Washington, and that is usually done through a general adjudication. So an adjudication is where all of the water rights and all the claims for an entire area are taken one by one in front of a court, and the court decides what is still valid and what that water right, whether or not that water right is still good today. And that a full adjudication of the Yakima Basin in Eastern Washington has been completed. And so all of the water rights there have been quantified, including the Yakima Nations. And there's a planned adjudication in the Nooksack Basin, so in mostly Whatcom County, that will likely start in a couple years, where that will be done for the Lummi Nation and the Nooksack tribe. But that has,
Who pays for the fees, the court fees for those adjudications?
I don't know. I could get back to you.
Okay, my question is just how Department of Ecology is trying to protect, well, we live on a shallow well. So how are they trying to protect our water rights as our local tribe commercially develops our rural residential area?
Gotcha. Well, if you, so I would be happy to get back to you if you want to put your email in the chat.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, thank you.
Yep.
Andrea, I can make sure you get Julie's email too.
Great, thank you.
She's on the link, you know, the link we have.
Oh, right, yeah,
here,
that's
so,
right.
there were a couple of other questions in there. Carol, I wanted to get, I was going to halt questions. Julie jumped in, but I was going to halt questions until Margie had her say, because I knew she had to leave at 10:45, and I noticed that she's already gone.
Oh, sorry.
So I truly would like to have had her put in her input for what's happening with Sierra Club right now.
Yeah.
She did mention though that they have been putting in things for Earth Day as well. There were a number of other questions though. I told you there would be a number here, Andrea.
No, that's great. Yeah, I can go through the questions in the chat. That would be
Yeah.
helpful.
Well, I'll let the people that ask them kind of jump in here. But first, Carol McMahon had one. Carol, are you still here? Would you like to? Well, I think we've lost Carol too. It says this talk is largely regarding quantity and protections. How are we now impacted by the ruling of the Supreme Court this week that removes protections established in 1972 against pollution? Which my assumption is that the quality of water will come into play rapidly, and that will reduce availability. Is that in the forecast, do you suppose, or I don't know? That's Carol's projection.
I don't have a great answer to that. I can definitely put you in touch with our water quality program that permits water quality. And I personally have not seen a case where degrading water quality affected someone's ability to use their water right, and or the reduction in water quality reduced the water available for people to use. Personally, I haven't dealt with that issue before, and yeah, I think our water quality program would have more to say about that, so I'd be happy to put you in touch with them.
Well, we actually had a similar, I'm not
great.
sure, that happened up there when a developer wanted to go in near Stanwood. And he wanted to put, I don't know, 300 homes on that particular site. And it was the tribes that stepped forth and said that would reduce their aquifer and affect the wells that were on tribal land and the surrounding area. And so that one was, it curtailed that particular development at that time. So but I think that there are similar ideas of pollutants. I think this one was directed at the pollutants going into the waterways and actually affecting them there. So we do have cases in here, Andrea, where we have to be vigilant. Julie's case being one that she's definitely concerned because she's right next door, and what happens next on her neighbor's property affects her property. And then Sally had one that was just for a term. Sally, you want to ask that? I don't know. She spelled it out there. If you
An intertie, yeah, I see that. So an intertie is a connection between water systems. So, for example, there are many, like some of the Snohomish County PUD water systems have emergency interties with the city of Everett. So they physically have pipes connecting their water system to the city of Everett's, and have an agreement set up between the two water systems as to how the water is shared. So in that case, it's likely that the smaller water system purchases some water from the city of Everett regularly or on an emergency basis in case something happens to their smaller water system. And the intertie is physically created. It's a good, it's a good backup to always have an intertie.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Great clarifying question, Sally. Thank you. Kate you had a question next. Does mitigation?
Yeah, I just wondered, what does mitigation look like if you're going to be taking more water than is permitted under the law? How does that mitigation happen? Does that just mean that you are allowing somebody to pay money that will be used to restore watersheds in some other area?
Yeah, am I still sharing my screen?
No.
No, I'm not. Okay. Well, yeah, I can do without the picture. So that's a great question. Mitigation for a water use like permitted by water right has to be in the place where the impact would be. And also the timing has to be figured out so that the timing of the mitigation makes up for the impact. And in kind, which just means water for water. And so those standards of in kind, in time, and place were clarified by the courts in those cases that I mentioned, Postema and Foster, in the past 10 years. And those came about because a city that didn't have enough water to serve new customers proposed using more water from the stream and mitigating it by creating or improving habitat nearby. And our department actually approved it at the time. This was about 15 years ago. And that was appealed and brought to eventually the state Supreme Court, which ruled against us and said, no, the mitigation has to be making up exactly for the water being used. You can't make up for it by doing other projects like improving habitat.
All right, thanks, Andrea. So you can't just take water and go and plant a tree somewhere. Okay.
Exactly.
Sarah, you had quite a complex question. I'm not sure I understand the question, so I'm going to let you ask the question here. Are you
Sure.
ready here? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was just curious as to how much actual water monitoring in terms of both the flow, the surface water body flows for streams and rivers, as well as extraction, whether you're talking about the larger water users or even the exempt wells. I mean, how much monitoring is there in this whole system, or is that not so much?
Yeah, not as much as we would like to be doing, and not as much as we, wish we could be doing, just mostly due to budgetary, reasons. So those in-stream flows, the protected amount of water in stream, like I said, were created at different times. So some in 1979, some in 2005, and we had different understandings then of how much water should be left in stream for fish habitat and other reasons. And I see your question too about updating. whether those get updated, and the answer is no, they don't. And we, that's not to say that it couldn't happen in the future, but that's not the trajectory that we're on right now. It's interesting, you can see in California, they've actually been establishing those stream flow protections. I believe for the first time, just in the past 10 years, they're just making them now. And they are, they have been created using much more sophisticated modeling techniques than ours were. Ours are pretty simplistic, and especially those older ones. And then the way that we are monitoring that work now is pretty limited. And I would say more of our work is regulating on a case-by-case basis those issues of impairment and non-permitted uses, and taking compliance actions against folks who are using water without a permit. That's a lot of our compliance work currently. I hope that answers your question. I'd be
Yeah,
happy.
I just wonder, as you know, certain basins become more impaired with less water.
Yeah.
Doesn't that drive us as a society into the, like, we all have an electric meter, right? We all pay an electricity bill.
Yeah.
And you know, I was just supposed to guess and tell the electric company how much electricity I use. You know, that's not going to be for an overall successful system for everybody, probably. So.
Yeah, that's a good point. We do have, I should say, we do have a metering program. So some users are required to have a meter on their water diversion or well and report that meter data to us annually. And that's not all water users, because there are hundreds of thousands of them across the state. But we mostly focus that metering program on areas, on the larger users, and it's a bit more focused on surface water users instead of people using wells. And it's also more focused in areas that are that provide more critical fish habitat. So like there are specific basins, like the Snohomish Basin is kind of prioritized over, for example, the Stillaguamish Basin. And so that metering data is monitored annually.
And
then
yeah, go ahead. This is going to sound like it's more of a political structure question, I guess, than it is.
Sure.
How large is the Department of Ecology?
I believe that the water resources program is maybe somewhere between 200 and somewhere around 200 employees. And
that's for the whole state, right?
For the whole state. Yeah.
And are you divided geographically in terms of your what you monitor?
That's a great, yeah. So I work in the Northwest Regional Office. There are 4 regional offices. So the Northwest consists of basically down to Tacoma, up to Canada, up to the mountains to the east, and including the islands to the west. And then we also have a Southwest region, Central region, and an Eastern region. And staff within those regional offices do the permitting work and the compliance work within their region. And then we also have a headquarters outside of Olympia where the statewide decisions and planning takes place.
And how much of that, so the 230 approximate people spread across statewide, how many of them are in your little sector?
In the Northwest Regional Office, we have about 20.
You have 20.
Mm-hmm. Small group.
And are you further divided in terms of what your, is there a further geographic division within that?
Yes, by individual staff. So, and we actually do have a very small office in Bellingham, and that's for the staff working in the northernmost part of our region. So right now, well, we had one, we just hired a second person working in the Bellingham region, and they work in like the Nooksack Basin, so Whatcom County mostly. And then we have the staff working in our Northwest Regional Office who have areas of focus. So I work mostly in the Snohomish watershed and the Stillaguamish watershed, and a little bit in the Island County area. And we have, one person who does Kitsap County, the Kitsap watershed, that kind of like breakdown, different.
And how much time would you say is field work as opposed to office work?
It's majority office work, and then it kind of depends on the position. So some staff are mostly working on writing permits and providing so they're like hydrogeologists who are doing the kind of assessments about whether or not where new uses can be approved, and working people through the permitting process. And they would only do field work to visit the actual site of the permit applicant and to see the project on the ground. And then we have compliance staff who are working with people with existing water rights or people who don't have water rights and are using water illegally. And they do more field work to visit those people on site, and then also to just kind of visit their areas and see on the ground where there might be areas of concern. One of the things that they do is we have a small boat, and we will float down rivers to see where there are diversions coming out of the river, and back in the office, do the kind of research to figure out who's using the water, if they actually have a permit to do so or not.
Are you finding that as the glaciers are melting that there's an increase in water flow in some pits in those areas?
No, we are seeing a lot less water flowing by the end of the summer. So we're seeing sometimes really high like flood events and flows in the spring during the peak flows. But yeah, the flows over the summer, which are really critical for especially, irrigation, it's becoming less available.
Now, we talked that you said there's a separate division that addresses water quality. How many personnel are addressing water quality?
It's a bigger program than the water resources program. I'm not exactly sure how many staff. This is a terrible answer, but somewhere between more than 200 and less than 500, and that's probably as close as I can guess. And they do things like permitting wastewater treatment facilities, and then also, groundwater, water quality monitoring, and kind of a wide range of water quality issues.
So are they more field oriented, or are they again office oriented?
I think it's kind of similar to the water resources program, where we visit permit applicants on site and visit permit holders on site as needed. And if there's a monitoring component of their work, they'll actually, go out in the field more regularly to collect samples or
And
is
is
the-
it a request that brings you to a site? And then usually between the time that a request is filed and it actually happens, what is usually the time that is involved in that?
Yeah, so we have a reporting tool on our website, and I can put that link in the chat, where we do get reports of, water, someone saying, that somebody's using water illegally, or their, well is running dry, and that would get directed to us. And I just wanted to get that right. Report environmental issues. And sorry, so we can respond. We usually get that very quickly and respond to it as soon as possible. If it's something that we would, if the person left their contact information, we would get back to them within a couple days. And if it was, I can't guarantee that we would get out in the field and see it in person within a few days, but that would probably be the goal. And I'll put that link in the chat.
That would be great, or you can give it to me and I will pass it along to them. That would be great, Andrea.
Yeah.
And usually I tell people, we've kept you an hour and I'm sure there are even more questions here, but we have other things on our agenda today. So, and I did want you to know that you don't have to stay or hang out for the entire meeting. But we do appreciate your coming, and I think we've learned a little bit about the structure behind. Thank you very much. We really, everybody is giving you the clap here. And we appreciate the time that it takes for you to come and give us the history and the background. Sometimes that's lacking in the way that we address situations and issues, and I think it helps us to have that history and that structure behind our own view of a situation. So thank you very much for coming and giving us that educational piece.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope it was helpful, and I would be happy to answer any other questions by email or by phone. So I'll make sure, or Joan has my contact information. If you could share that, that would be great. And I'd be happy if anybody wanted to reach out to follow up.
Sounds wonderful, Andrea. And be sure and send that link for reaching out to you. We'd love to share that.
Yeah, I will do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.